Hello aspirants, very good morning to all of you. So friends, welcome back to Anthropology PYQ series. So friends, where we were trying to decode every question and mastering every concept. So friends, we are trying to just learn and solve one PYQ one day. So from my side, I'm putting my efforts and I'm expecting the same from you. So start writing your answers. So just insisting for those who are joining new. So friends, let's start and let's begin our discussion of the day with the question of the day. So the question of the day with us is that describe briefly the theoretical perspectives in linguistic anthropology to explain the relationship of culture, language, and thought. So this is the question for us. So the question, if you see from the perspective of the question, the central theme of the question from where the question has been picked is, it is unit number 7. So in unit number 7, we have the topic that is the language, culture, and communication. So the question has been picked from that particular section. Now, the question is seeking to explain or discuss about some theoretical perspectives in the linguistic anthropology. So, which shows the relationship between the culture, language, and human thought process. So that's the basic question. So I hope you can understand the demand of the question. So now what we have to just write and how we have to proceed for this particular question. So let's see and let's talk about the approach of the question. So how we can approach this particular question, right? So if you see from the perspective of the question's demand, so it is talking to establish the relationship between culture, language, and thought, and it is expecting us to just bring in the context of some theoretical perspectives. So how you can introduce means you can simply introduce the answer by highlighting the relationship between the culture, language, and thought, and you can also bring in the context of the linguistic anthropology. So what is linguistic anthropology? Basically you can say, and how linguistic anthropology helps in systematic understanding of the relationship between culture, language, and human thought. So that's one thing you should keep in mind. So that's how you can introduce this topic. Then in the body portion of the answer, so try to enumerate various theoretical perspectives in linguistic anthropology. So then you can explain each theoretical perspective in detail, so that how they will show or how they will explain the relationship between these aspects. So that's one thing that you can do in the body portion of the answer, right? And then you can conclude the answer by reiterating the relationship between culture, language, and thought, that is human thought process. So this is how you can proceed to the approach. So I hope that is clear to you all. So now let us try to understand the concept in detail. So what's all about this particular concept and how we can understand. So what are those theoretical perspectives in linguistic anthropology? So first, let us try to discuss and understand by knowing what is linguistic anthropology and how does it help in establishing relationship between culture, language, and human thought. So first, just have a glance. So if you see from the perspective of the linguistic anthropology, so linguistic anthropology is nothing but it's a branch of anthropology which deals or which tries to deal with the study of language in relationship with both biological as well as cultural aspects of the human beings. So there are certain biological aspects and there are certain cultural aspects which determine the language. So let's say for example, our human cognitive thought process, that is thinking process. So there are certain portions of the brain so which helps us to speak and which helps us to comprehend, right? So these kind of things will usually, they will determine the language. That's one thing. And there are so many cultural aspects that also further determine and that also further helps in perpetuation of the language. So in linguistic anthropology, what we will do, we will systematically try to study language in relationship to the biological as well as cultural aspects of the human beings. And in other words, what is the chief objective or motto of linguistic anthropology? So this is another important aspect. So linguistic anthropology, what does it do? It chiefly tries to examine the structure of the language and the use of the language, and then origin, development and classification of the language in relation to specific cultures. So how a particular language has been originated in a particular culture, how the language has been classified in a particular culture, like that. So we can see this would be the subject matter of the linguistic anthropology. So from this perspective, what do this linguistic anthropology do? So linguistic anthropology, like if you see, it also, that is, the study of linguistic anthropology also explores how language functions not only as a medium of communication, rather as a medium of expressing the culture and shaping the human cognition. So that is another important aspect. So how language shapes the culture and how language helps in shaping the human thought process or human cognition. So this is also another aspect that we'll be learning in linguistic anthropology. So thus, if you generally see, there is a kind of relationship. So the relationship between the culture, language and thought is central concern to the linguistic anthropology. So that's where the question has been picked, as it is the key in understanding linguistic anthropology. The question has been picked and it has been slightly applicative question in this. So that's so now if we happen to see what is the relationship between the culture, language and thought. So first we should understand that. So when we understand that, then we can understand the further aspects. So what about the relationship between them? So first let's try to understand. So if you see from the perspective of language, culture and the human thought. So culture, language and thought, so they have a kind of they are deeply intertwined and they have a kind of intricate relationship among those three. So how we can say, so they are, in fact, we can see culture shapes the language. That's one thing. So culture helps in shaping the language. In each and every culture, the language would be different. So, and the words, the meanings, everything will change from culture to culture. That's one thing. So culture will help in shaping the language. So by providing some values, norms and some categories of languages, etc., etc. Right? So that's one thing. So let's say, for example, in North Indian culture, the North Indian culture uses Hindi and its different dialects. So there are different categories of Hindi. So that is like, it is Bhojpuri Hindi, or like different dialects of Hindi are available. So here, like that. Then you can see other thing is that language further shapes the thought. So language shapes the thought. That is another important aspect. So how does it shape? So usually language frames the perception and language frames the cognition. So it gives thinking ability. So for example, if you want to think anything, so you will think usually in your mother tongue, isn't it? So you will process it. You will think in your mother tongue. You will talk to yourself in your mother tongue. So that's how language shapes the thought. That's one thing. Then what happens? Then thought reinforces the culture. So here, look at the sequence. So culture shapes the language, then language shapes the thought, then thought reinforces again the culture. So can you see the relationship? So it is a kind of triadic relationship where both of them are intricately interlinked and both of them are functioning in a kind of triad. So that's where you can see that language, culture and thought are deeply intertwined. So where we can see the intricate relationship among these three. So that is one thing that we should remember. So then let's try to understand what are the theoretical perspectives that helps to explain this particular relation. So there are so many theoretical perspectives that helps to understand this particular relation. So let's try to see what are those theoretical perspectives. So in the body portion of the answer, you can explain all these theoretical perspectives. So what are those? Let's say, for example, if you see from linguistic anthropology. So linguistic anthropology explains the relationship among the culture, language and thought with the help of some key theoretical perspectives. So what are those theoretical perspectives? Number one, first one is the Sapir-Whorf's hypothesis. That's one thing. Then ethnosemantics is the next thing. Then ethnography of the communication propounded by Delhaims. That's one thing. Then language ideologies, that's one thing. And then cognitive anthropology, this is another important thing, right? So these are all the perspectives that will help to explain. Are you getting that? So that's what. So then, if you happen to understand, like what is Sapir-Whorf's hypothesis? This Sapir-Whorf's hypothesis is also known as linguistic relativity hypothesis. So linguistic relativity hypothesis is something, so it is concerned with. So who proposed this linguistic relativity hypothesis? So Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee-Whorf. So Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee-Whorf. So Edward Sapir was a student of our Franz, and other thing is that so Benjamin Lee-Whorf was a student of Edward Sapir. Can you able to catch that? So here both of them have systematically developed a kind of hypothesis that shows that establishes the relationship between the language and the human thought process. So what does it advocate? It basically advocates that language influences the human thought process. So the way thoughts exists, so that in turn will be determined by the language. So it says, in one perspective, it says that language determines the thought. Language determines the thought process. So this hypothesis, in other way, like in one version, it is also called as linguistic determinism, because the language is determining the thought process of the humans. That's one thing. So then there is other version of it, so weak version of it. So the weak version of it says that linguistic relativity. So it says that language, it basically influences the human thought process. So amongst these two versions, the linguistic relativity, which is known as the weak version, which advocates language influences the human thought process, that has been mostly adapted thing and mostly accepted thing by so many anthropologists. Whereas the other concept, that is linguistic determinism, is a strong concept which says that language determines the human thought process. So that has not been accepted widely, because how can language determine the thought process? So that's where one thing they have not adapted it. So this is one thing that you should keep in mind. So you can explain how language influences the human thought process with the help of some examples. So here Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee-Whorf, so both of them have given some of the examples with the help of colors. So color codes for explaining this concept. So try to incorporate all such kind of points in this and try to establish how language influences the human thought process. So that is one thing that you should do. Then if we happen to see ethnosemantics, so this is another important theoretical perspective. So ethnosemantic, ethnos refers to culture and cultural behavior. Semantics refers to it is concerned with the decoding of the speech. So what are the various, it's one of the rule to construct the language. So here, what is the ethnosemantics? It argues, or it says, so it says that cultural knowledge is encoded in the speech. Cultural knowledge is encoded in the speech. So the way we speak, that means within our language, we can interpret the cultural knowledge in our speech. Let's say, for example, if we happen to just see in Hindi point of view, so we try to address the elders, aap kaha ja rahe ho. So we will use the word aap. And then, for example, for elders, we say tum kaha ja rahe ho. So we will say that. Isn't it? So here, the word aap and tum. So it basically, it can be reflected. It is from the cultural knowledge. So we can say, like, culture will have different, each and every culture will have different way of addressing things. And the cultural knowledge and cultural values can be reflected in the speech or language. So that's what the ethnosemantics says. So you should just you have to just explain it in a systematic fashion about what is ethnosemantics and what is its core area of study. and how does the cultural knowledge will be encoded in the speech. So this is what you have to establish in this particular from this particular perspective. Then there is another perspective in linguistics that is known as ethnography of the communication. So ethnography of communication. So here this has been proposed by Del Hymes, a scholar is known as Del Hymes. So what does this say? It says that if you want to understand the language properly, then you must and should understand the cultural rules and cultural contexts. So language is shaped according to the culture and cultural contexts. So if you want to systematically understand the language, then you must and should understand the culture. So what does it advocate? So this ethnography of the communication advocates that culture determines the patterns of the speaking. There are different patterns of speaking, so which would be determined by the culture. So it is also known as cultural determinism. So where culture determines the different patterns of the speaking. So that's what the ethnography of the communication is all about. So this concept or this perspective has been advocated by Del Hymes, right? So that is one thing that you should remember. Then we have another perspective in linguistic anthropology, which is nothing but the language ideologies. So what is this language ideologies? So it basically advocates that various beliefs about the language reflect the cultural and power structures. Cultural and power structures. So cultural and power structures would be reflected in the beliefs about the language. So that's what it is saying. That means here particularly it talks about the ideology of the language. So here you can take up various dialects of a particular language. Let's say, for example, if you see from the perspective of Telugu, so you can have different dialects of the language. So one is Rayalaseema accent, another one is like Telangana accent, and another one is the coastal Andhra accent. So here what you have to understand is that there would be advocacy that the literal language is pure and you should try to promote it. So that would be one thing. So pure Telugu you should advocate. So that kind of aspect would be reflected in the language ideologies. Same is the case with respect to other languages also. It could be Hindi, it could be English, it could be Hindi, or it could be the Kannada, or it could be Tamil. So there would be different dialects, right? So that concept has been advocated in the language ideologies. So where again the beliefs about the language is reflecting the culture. So you can establish the cultural relationship between language and culture here again. So this is another key perspective. Then we have cognitive anthropology. This is another important perspective. Cognitive anthropology. So what does this cognitive anthropology says? So it's a kind of perspective which advocates that if you want to understand the culture of a particular society, you must and should try to decode the human thought process. So culture could be understood. Culture, you can understand the culture when you properly decode the human thought process. So that's what the cognitive anthropology, which has been advocated by Tyler and Conklin. So this has been another important perspective where you can further establish how culture can be understood from the perspective of human thought process. So that's what this particular perspective is all about. So what you have to do in the body portion, you should try to introduce all these perspectives and you should say this particular perspective has been introduced by so and so. This particular perspective advocates this, and this is how this particular perspective tries to establish relationship between the language, culture and communication. So that's how you should address this particular question. So this is the one important aspect that you should remember. So in all, if you see, culture, language and thought are intricately interlinked and all three of them will form a triad. So that you have to remember. So this triadic concept has been advocated by all these perspectives. So that's what the core concept, core objective of this particular thing. Then how can you conclude this particular concept? So you can say, or you can conclude by reiterating the relationship between them. So we understood that they forms or they make up a triad. So you can mention it at least here. So in simple way, you can say like this: the relationship between culture, language, and the thoughts is mutually constitutive. It's a mutually constitutive aspect where all three of them, they will form a dynamic triad, so which influences each other continuously. So there would be a continuous influence between one and other. So that's how you can bring in the context. And then further what we can say, the theoretical perspectives in linguistic anthropology collectively demonstrate that the relationship between the culture, language, and human thought process is dynamic and interdependent. So in all the perspective, each perspective shows that one thing is dependent on other. Let's say if culture is determined by human thought process, or if you want to understand the culture, you should understand or you should decode the structure of human thought process, or culture shapes the human thought process, or language determines the culture. So all of them, what are they advocating? They are advocating that they are dynamic and they are interdependent. So this is one thing, right? And then finally, you can bring in the context of linguistic anthropology also, and where you can say that linguistic anthropology thus shows the way people use language is powerful reflection of how they understand their world. So language and understanding of the culture, so they are intricate. So that's how you can say, and any of these kind of statements or words or sentences you can use and you can try to conclude the answer, right? So I hope all of you are on track and all of you are trying to write the answer. So friends, this is what I wanted to discuss with you, all of you today. So try to just learn more about these approaches where you can just incorporate more and more points, and any of those points can be picked and asked in 10 markers also in the future. Let's say for example, write a short notes on the ethnography of the communication. So this could be one particular question that they may pick, right? So already the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis has been picked and asked. In the similar fashion, they can pick any of the particular things. So try to be cautious and try to be very much aware of these kind of perspectives also. So that's all for today from my side. So is there any doubts for anyone? Those who have joined online, so you can just type in the chat box so that I can address your doubts. So any doubts for anyone? You are free to ask now. So this is from my side for today, and if you want to just submit your answer and if you want to get your copies evaluated, so you can share your answer and you can join our Telegram channel, Anthropology Guide, and you can submit the question and you can submit the answer, and that's where you can get the feedback for your answer. So that's one thing that I would like to share. So that's all for today from my side. So friends, we'll meet again tomorrow, and let's try to discuss. So there is a question. So once I explain introduction. So yes. So introduction. The question is asking us to establish the relationship between language, culture, and thought process. So for this, the examiner is trying to bring in the context of some theoretical perspectives of linguistic anthropology. So he's asking how various theoretical perspectives in linguistic anthropology, it helps us to understand the relationship between the culture, language, and thought process. So as the question's central theme is linguistic anthropology and the relationship between culture, language, and human thought process. So you have to just establish and you have to just mention these aspects. So what are those? So you can bring in these three contexts. So this is where you can start basically with by defining linguistic anthropology. So where you can say it's a branch of anthropology which deals with the study of language in relationship with the biological as well as cultural aspects of the human beings. So this is how you can introduce the answer from linguistic anthropology point of view. So where if you want to study the language, we should understand some biological aspects, isn't it? So there are certain portions of the brain which are concerned with the language comprehension, and there are certain parts of the brain which are concerned with the processing of the language. So this is where, so language is associated with biological aspects. So mind, that's one thing. Then language is also associated with the culture. So in linguistic anthropology, we will try to study all of this. So from this you can say that the relationship between culture, language and human thought is central concern in the linguistic anthropology. So we have introduced linguistic anthropology, then we are saying that it is central in the linguistic anthropology, and then you can say this study, linguistic anthropology, what would be its core function. So what does it do? It tries to explore how language functions not only as communication tool, rather linguistic anthropology also tries to explore the language as a medium for harnessing culture and shaping the human thought process. So that's how you can introduce. So by establishing the relationship between these three, right? So that's how you can introduce, and that's how you can have it. So that's one thing. I hope it is clear to you, Pragna. Right? So Vanishri is saying, okay, good. So good, you are following on regular basis. So try to just follow regular basis and try to share our links also with your friends if you like the content and if you like the concepts. So that's all for today from my side. So we'll meet again tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. and let's try to take up another important question and let's discuss it and let's decode it. So thank you all for joining me with this session. We'll meet tomorrow. Thank you.